Step into the light or the shadow it casts. A look in the mirror, stripping the mask. The ego deflects what the id wants to hide, but we find the truth on the edge of the slide. The void isn't empty, it's a canvas of gray, where the ghosts of our bias come out to play. You point at the monster, you point at the screen, but it's only a shadow that's being seen. We sit in the silence where the tension is rife, dissecting the ego with a surgical knife. From the depths of the abyss to the clarity of mind, leaving the noise and the drama behind. High etiquette, held as the ultimate key. This is the Short Burst Podcast TV. See the mirror for what it is. The progression begins now.
Man up, slaves, and hit those buttons, or I'll send ice.
Greetings, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Coming at you today with the Amish fuel miracle. Genius engineering or total scam? Portion of what we want to discuss on the future podcast panel programs. And so I'm going through and doing some reviews of other platform videos to help open the topics up. And this is one of them. When we start living off-grid, we can make our own fuels on the micro level. What types of fuels and what types of materials can we use to make those fuels is one of those questions. Today, we're going to look at the Amish fuel miracle. And this is an explosion here recently because of the off-grid lifestyle. And so we're going to take a look at this gentleman's video. This is Eli Yoder Secrets. The link is down in the details section. So go ahead and grab that and check him out. Go over and sub and follow him and see what he's got to say, because we're questioning this. And greetings, Dean. Good to have you here. And let's get into it. We have
thousands of you left a comment on the last video telling me the same thing. You said, Eli, that tree does not grow in my state. And you were right. So I went back, I drove to Holmes County. I sat with two families I have known for years, and I asked them one question: what grows?
And real quick here, folks, I want to remind you, please hit that like, share, and subscribe. And of course, there's a PayPal link down there for anybody who wants to share some love. Would really help us out. We're in need, short financed here because of a wrongful eviction, and want to get the StreamYard back up to a full panel. So always appreciated.
Goes everywhere. What they showed me is older, simpler, and thrives in every climate in the United States, including yours. There is a plant that produces over 100 gallons of fuel per acre. It grows from Florida to North Dakota. It needs no refinery, no pipeline, and no permission from anyone. The Amish have been pressing it into oil for generations, feeding the leftover meal to their animals, and running their equipment on it, while the rest of us stood in line at the gas station. The reason you have never heard about this system is documented in a book called The Forbidden Fuel, A History of Power Alcohol, published in 1983, that names every company and every lobbyist who paid to keep it from you. The first time I saw it working was in a shed outside Sugar Creek.
Major news. We're suing.
Very reason to hit that PayPal link and help us out so we can get rid of these damn ads. Appreciate it.
Ohio. A man named Samuel had a hand press bolted to a workbench, a 5-gallon bucket underneath catching golden oil, and a diesel generator running in the corner with no smell and no smoke. I asked him where his fuel came from. He did not point at a gas station. He pointed at the...
Absolutely agree, Dean. Dean Phillips says it's a ridiculous situation how this renewable energy has been so suppressed. It's just like Nikola Tesla. But I assure you, all this technology that we're looking at to live off grid was around long before any of our modern times. It was like a natural process that we came across, just like apples falling from a tree, and we discovered it was alcoholic because it had fermented. So we've learned this stuff along the way, but we're allowing technologies to take over this stuff, and that's part of this questioning whether it's valid or not to do this stuff. The workload that we're going to have to put on ourselves in the microprocessing, is that going to be worth it? Or is it going to be better to go to the gas tank or to the gas station and get that fuel? We're weighing those things in these panel debates.
Field behind his barn. Sunflowers, 6 rows of sunflowers growing along the fence line, planted in May, harvested in September, pressed in October. And before this video is over, I am going to show you something that happened in a small town in Kansas in 1938, something involving 2,000 gas stations across 8 states. That will change how you see every gallon of fuel you have ever purchased in your life.
Yep,
That
pay attention.
alone is worth staying to the end. But first, you need to understand why this plant works so well, why it was deliberately buried, and why it matters right now, even if you already own a home and have no intention of farming a single acre of land. Here is the part that nobody told you. And I mean, you heard me mention in the last video that Rudolf Diesel demonstrated his engine at the Paris World Exhibition in 1900 running on peanut oil. What I did not tell you last time was what happened in the decades after that demonstration, because what happened next is the part they worked the hardest to erase from every textbook and every fuel conversation in this country. 8 years after Diesel showed the world an engine running on vegetable oil, Henry Ford released the Model T. That car was designed from day one to run on ethanol or gasoline, either one. The driver chose. Ford did not hide this fact. He told the New York Times in 1925 that the fuel of the future would come from fruit, weeds, sawdust, almost anything that grows. He said it publicly, and he meant every word. He put his own money behind it. And he was not the only brilliant mind saying the same thing.
Yes, Ford was an ingenious man. He came up with the process for production lines and stuff, and that's what we're talking about. It's processes. And he went to the natural processes of things. Instead of being able to mass produce things without it, it would be almost you would almost be incapable. The production line is what brought us to the mechanization and manufacturing, large manufacturing scales, the macro scales. Can we do those same kind of things on the micro scales to avoid those macro capitalist disadvantages?
Alexander Graham Bell, the man who invented the telephone, wrote in National Geographic magazine in 1917 that alcohol was a beautiful, clean, and efficient fuel, and that we would never need to fear running out of energy as long as we could produce a crop. 2 of the most famous inventors in American history looked at the same future and saw the same answer. A country where farmers grew their own fuel, where energy independence was not a political slogan but a garden chore, where no tanker crossed an ocean and no pipeline crossed a state line to keep your tractor running in the morning. That future was not a dream. It was already being constructed in the American Midwest. By 1937, a company called Agril had opened a production plant in Atchison, Kansas. They blended ethanol made from American grain into motor fuel, 2 grades, Agril 5 and Agril 10, backed by Henry Ford himself and the Chemical Foundation. At its peak in 1938, Agril fuel was...
And Dean again says, I can imagine small communities living well by creating their own food and fuel. That's independence. That's where the power structure is. That's where you have your most power is at the local communities, the local levels, where people can exchange things without the fiat currencies.
Was available at over 2,000 service stations across 8 Midwestern states. 2,000 stations, from Indiana to South Dakota to Iowa to Nebraska. The slogan was, try a tankful, you will be thankful. The plant in Atchison was producing 18 million gallons of ethanol a year. Farmers were buying it. Everyday drivers were buying it. The fuel worked. The engines ran clean. The economics made sense for the people growing the grain and the people filling their tanks, but it did not make sense for Standard Oil. Standard Oil, the empire John D. Rockefeller, built by controlling 90% of American oil refining by 1880, had spent decades making sure no alternative could compete. Their strategy was never to make a better product. Their strategy was to destroy every competitor before it could gain a foothold.
And if you're not in the market and you're doing it on the micro scale for yourself, then they can't beat you out of it. Their regulations do not apply in certain areas. It's like the unrestricted land that we reviewed yesterday. There are certain things that they cannot restrict according to the laws. This goes in consideration with the conservation easements and biological organisms. As a biological organism, a man, defined as an animal, I have certain inherent natural rights under natural law that can't be invaded. They're not supposed to be invaded. And that's, again, why it's so important to have knowledge through education of proper research and discourse.
And when Agrol showed up at 2,000 pumps with a fuel that worked, Standard Oil declared war. The tactics are documented in congressional records and academic histories. The National Petroleum Association called ethanol fuel an outrage against common sense. They spread a campaign claiming that allowing ethanol at gas stations would turn every filling pump into a potential speakeasy, playing on lingering fears from prohibition. They pressured legislators.
And then when they decided they needed to get rid of the leaded gas, they went to unleaded, and then they turned around and decided that wasn't quite good enough again. So they went back to ethanol. Now they've got 10% ethanol, and a lot of the government vehicles today run on what's called 85% ethanol. Amazing, isn't it?
Legislators in every Midwestern state capital and in Washington. They killed 19 federal bills and 31 state bills on alcohol fuel between 1,933 and 1,900.
And notice they called it alcohol fuel. Understand what they're doing with definitions. That's one of the important topics we're going to be discussing on these platforms. Is we have, in the legality sense of things, we have to go to the definitions. We discussed this quite a bit on Malika's platforms that I've mentioned. Adam and Eve homesteading, lawful living, and freedomfromgovernment.org.
139.
Hey, if you're a gun owner, I guarantee.
And again, real quick here, to help us avoid these various inconveniences, please help out by hitting that PayPal link below and sharing a little bit of love. Always appreciated.
9. And when legislation failed to stop Agrol, they turned to the most brutal weapon in their arsenal, price dumping. They dropped the price of leaded gasoline to match Agrol penny for penny. Agrol sold at 17 cents a gallon. Standard Oil pushed their leaded fuel down to 16 cents, not because gasoline cost that little to refine, because Standard Oil could afford to lose money for years and a startup in Kansas could not. And here is the detail that makes it personal. The fuel.
See, it's the long game. It's the long game, and the idea that the little man can't last the long game trying to keep prices low. He needs his profit, and if the big companies can afford to lose money, they can lower the prices so much that it'll force the small guy out of competition one way or another. That's why I say it's not about competition. It's about being the small guy. It's about being the gray rock. It's about going back to the original sources, the natural sources that they resource.
Standard Oil was pushing at 16 cents a gallon to undercut Agrol was leaded gasoline. They knew lead was toxic. The health risks were documented in the early 1920s. Workers at refineries producing tetraethyl lead were getting sick, losing their minds, and dying. The Surgeon General held hearings on it, but Standard Oil kept selling leaded fuel for 50 more years because adding lead was cheaper than blending ethanol as an anti-knock agent. Ethanol would have done the same job without poisoning a single person. But ethanol came from farms. Lead came from refineries they already owned. The managers at the Agrol plant went on record accusing the oil industry of
and that's what I was talking about when they went to the ethanol in the 80s.
Sabotage, propaganda, and deliberate economic warfare. By 1939, Agrol closed its doors, not because the fuel failed, not because drivers rejected it, because it could not survive a price war.
Yeah, and that's the ridiculous one, Dean. Did you know you can make diesel out of fryer grease? Go to the local restaurant, strain everything out of it. You use the fryer grease as diesel. It's the same thing. It runs the engine just as efficiently. It's amazing. Diesel over $6 a gallon.
War against the wealthiest corporation the world had ever seen, while that corporation simultaneously lobbied every
oil is the same thing, amazingly enough.
Legislature in the Midwest to block support for ethanol. But here is the part that should stop you cold. 3 years after they helped kill Agrol, the United States entered a rubber crisis during World War II. The military desperately needed synthetic rubber for tires, engine gaskets, raincoats, hoses, everything that kept the war machine running. And where did the government turn? They reopened the exact same ethanol plants they had helped destroy. The same chemists who designed the Agrol facility in Atchison, including a man named Leo Christensen.
Yeah, that's what they're talking about here with the sunflower seed oil.
Went back to work producing ethanol for aviation fuel and synthetic Buna S rubber. By 1944, 3/4 of all synthetic rubber produced in America came from Midwestern corn ethanol plants. The same fuel the petroleum industry called an outrage against common sense was literally winning the war. And when the war ended in 1945, they shut those plants down again. Every single one. The infrastructure dismantled, the knowledge shelved, the farmers sent back to buying someone else's fuel. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a budget decision made by men who understood exactly what farm fuel could do and decided it was more profitable to make sure you never found out. Now, let me show you the plant that changes everything. And I mean everything. The sunflower. Not a garden decoration, not something your grandmother grew for looks along the driveway. An industrial fuel crop that has been hiding in plain sight on American farms for over a century. Here are the numbers, and they are from university research, not from a blog. Sunflower seeds.
Yeah, and see, that's another point to bring about when we talk about these technologies. One of the things I've mentioned is that in my younger days, when computers first came out, I realized what this capitalist society does is when they come up with new technology, they put it before their government workers first. They get first dibs at using it in a market, a test market, to see if it's viable to put out for personal use. So the computers were actually a business access thing. And when they just tried to bring it to the micro level, the family, they had to go through test markets. This is what they do in everything. So yeah, the government aspect is that the military is the one that's controlling all of these regulations and everything. Again, supposedly for the preservation of society and nature because of their acts of war. They pose that they have this diligent duty to preserve nature in those acts of war, and that's the last thing that we see. I mean, think about Iran, the issues going on in the world today. Thank God they just recently came to a ceasefire for 2 weeks, despite the horrific attacks just yesterday or earlier today, I guess.
Contain 40 to 42% oil by weight. The best varieties push past 45%. Compare that to soybeans at around 18 to 20%. More than double the oil content per seed. 1 acre of oilseed sunflowers in good conditions produces between 1,300 and 2,000 pounds of seed. Press those seeds and you get somewhere between 35 and 105 gallons of raw oil from a single acre, depending on growing conditions and your press efficiency. A farmer in western Wisconsin documented the
So it's not going to give you enough yield to take your automobile way out of the community, but it should certainly help provide for fuel for around your general area. In perspective, if you can do an acre of sunflowers. So this is for your larger acreages. 40 acres is what they used to give the military when they came home from war. So about 40 acres, and that's what Adam and Eve Homestead has, is 40 acres. And it's just a matter of budgeting the land and what it can provide for your purposes. So if you don't need that fuel oil, you don't need to do this. Again, it's a matter of your choices and whether your production of these fuel oils by hand, manual labor on your own property, is sufficient enough and efficient enough, rather than using the fuel at the pumps.
High end of that range, 2,000 pounds of seed per acre.
No, if someone had told me I could be as energetic at...
And you can be just as energetic by hitting those buttons down below, like, share, and subscribe. And there is a PayPal button to help a brother out. Always appreciated, folks.
Percent oil content, 76% extraction rate. That equals 105 gallons of fuel from 1 acre of sunflowers. That is not a theoretical model. That is a field result from a real man on a working farm. And according to the Farm Energy Extension Program, sunflower oil yields are consistently superior to soybean for biodiesel, often producing double or triple the fuel per acre. The sunflower is a drought-tolerant crop with a deep root system. It grows in a wide variety of soil conditions. It can be planted in late spring and harvested by early fall in most regions.
And then when you harvest them, this is one of those plants, like it says, it's got deep root systems. You can pull them up by the roots and use the very plants in your turning of the soil, and it helps fertilize the soil better. What it's doing is those deep roots bring up the nutrients from the deeper soil and bring them up to the ground level, so that when you do your crop rotation, say next year you want to do beans for the same purpose. You can make fuel out of beans. So you can plant your beans, and it's a topsoil plant, and it thrives on those nutrients just like any plant. But if the nutrients aren't in the topsoil, their roots won't go down to where those nutrients are. So when you do your crop rotations, do them with your deep root systems, and then intervene with the topsoil root systems. Switch them out per season so that you can build a good soil biome.
Hybrids exist that mature in under 90 days. Now, here is the connection to the Amish that most people miss entirely. Cornell University Small Farms published a detailed report on oilseed farming that includes a direct reference to Amish practice. The Amish feed sunflower meal and oil to their horses. That is what gives them those healthy, shiny coats you notice when you drive through Lancaster County or Holmes County. The Amish know this plant. They have always...
Like most people in town use like coconut oil or something for the coats on their dogs and cats. Same thing. It's a healthy oil.
Always known it. They press the seeds. They burn the oil. They feed the leftover meal to their livestock. Zero waste. The oil goes in one direction. The high protein cake goes in another. Nothing is thrown away. Nothing requires a factory or a shipment from overseas.
Another thing I want to point out is I noticed in the Amish farms that we have around here locally, they do a lot of rabbits for rabbit meat. Now, the pellets from rabbits are high in nitrogen, so you can ferment them, ferment the rabbit pellets, and then distill them into a fuel as well. Many sources of getting fuel and not having to put up with waste. So when you have rabbits that you're selling for meat, you use the waste to make fuel.
A farmer named John Williamson at State Line Farm in North Bennington, Vermont, has been growing oilseed crops for biodiesel since 2004. He farms 40 acres of sunflowers, canola, flax, and mustard. He built a reactor in what he calls his bio barn that processes 400 gallons per batch. He averages 75 gallons of biodiesel per acre. His tractor runs on the fuel. He grows in his own fields. He does not buy diesel. He grows it, and the leftover meal feeds his animals and enriches his soil. This man has been doing it for over 20 years in Vermont, one of the coldest states in the country. But sunflowers are not the only option, and this is where the story...
And in a lot of the lower parts of the country here, we can get 2 seasons of sunflowers. So on that same 1 acre, in one summer, spring, summer, fall in the southern states, you can get 2 crops in 1 year.
It's critical for those of you in the far north. Canola produces between 75 and 240 gallons of oil per acre, depending on conditions and variety. That is potentially 3 to 5 times what soybeans produce. It grows exceptionally well in cool climates: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio. These are canola states. Penn State Extension has documented canola as a premier biodiesel crop for Pennsylvania. They have grown 70 acres of canola on university farmland and run their own diesel tractors on canola-based fuel. 1 bushel of canola seed yields just over 2 gallons of fuel. Here's the advantage that matters most if you live where winters are real. Penn State confirmed that canola-based biodiesel has a lower cloud point than biodiesel made from soybeans or animal fats. That means it stays liquid at colder temperatures. It does not gel up in your fuel lines when the thermometer drops below freezing. If you live in a state where January means single digits, canola is your crop. The university proved it in their own equipment. And then there is flaxseed. If you watched my video on wood preservation, you already know this plant. Boiled linseed oil, that is flax. Same plant, same oil, different use. It preserves your fence posts, your barn siding, your deck boards, but that exact same oil also runs in a diesel engine. It also lubricates farm machinery, bearings, and chains. 1 plant, 3 jobs: fuel, wood treatment, and mechanical lubrication. The Amish figured that out along...
I can't even button my work pants anymore.
I don't care if you can't. I can, and it's because I'm not eating enough. Hit that PayPal link and share some love, folks.
Engine agent wrote it down. All 3 crops, sunflower, canola, and flax, grow in hardiness zones 3 through 8 or wider. That covers every state in the lower 48. Every single one. No exceptions. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need 40 acres. You do not need 20. You do not need a barn or a tractor or a single piece of farm equipment you do not already own. Here is what the system actually looks like for a person with a house and a yard built before 1980. Start with a manual cold press, $60 to $100. It bolts to any workbench or table. You feed dried sunflower seeds in one end, clear golden oil drips out the bottom into a jar or bucket. The solid seed cake pushes out the other side, and that cake is high protein feed for chickens, goats, or garden compost. The process takes about 30 minutes per batch. The press has no motor, no electronics, and no parts that wear out in a normal lifetime. Samuel showed me one he had been using for 11 years. Same press, same bench. Never replaced a single piece. Cold pressed oil stores for 6 to 12 months in a sealed container, kept out of direct sunlight. You press in the fall after harvest, and you have fuel and lamp oil straight through to the following summer. No freezer, no preservatives, just a sealed bucket in a cool corner of your garage or basement. If you plant a 1/4 acre of oilseed sunflowers along your fence line or in a side lot, a strip of land most people use for absolutely nothing, you can press enough oil in one harvest season to run a kerosene heater through winter, fill oil lamps for emergency lighting during every power outage, lubricate every small engine and piece of machinery in your garage, and blend fuel for any diesel engine on your property. That blend is the part people refuse to believe until they see it with their own eyes. You can mix 20 to 30% raw pressed sunflower oil with standard pump diesel and run it in any diesel engine without a single modification. No conversion kit, no chemistry degree, no special filtration beyond a basic screen. You pour it in and the engine runs. Mythbusters tested this on camera. A diesel car that normally got 33 miles per gallon on petroleum diesel ran at 30 miles per gallon on filtered vegetable oil. 3 miles per gallon difference. The car ran great with no problems. That 3-mile penalty is the cost of total fuel independence for every diesel machine you own. A homesteader in Wisconsin has been mixing cold-pressed sunflower oil with diesel in his farm tractor for years. 105 gallons from 1 acre means he grows enough supplemental fuel in the corner of a single field to power his equipment through an entire planting and harvesting season.
And that's for a farmer. Imagine what you need for just yourself. He's running all of his farm equipment. It's for a farmer, just one little section off the side of a field. That's not bad.
One corner, one field, one season. And the sunflowers themselves are improving his soil with their deep root system while they grow. There is no crop on earth that gives you fuel, animal feed, soil improvement, and beauty all at the same time, except this one. The complete system fuel, heating, water, and every household bill is laid out step by step in the Amish home system. The link is in the description, but stay here, because what I am about to show you next is the part they worked the hardest to erase. Now think about this at a neighborhood scale. 5 families.
And that's why I question it. Does it work? You know, and so we find out not all of it is so great. So yeah, it's supplemental, not all of it. You have to mix it when it comes to the diesel. But again, like I said, there's peanut oil and other oils, soybean oil. They're just not as efficient, but they're straight diesel fuel comparative.
Families on the same road, each planting a 1/4 acre of sunflowers, that is just over an acre total, press the seeds together one Saturday afternoon, split the oil 5 ways. Every family walks away with enough fuel and lamp oil to reduce their dependence on outside energy for the entire winter. The Amish do not do this alone, they do it together. That is part of the system most people.
And that's what we're looking at. Again, like I said earlier, it's your local community that is the strongest. And that's how it works. Watch your Amish. They stay very communal and they have a lot of power.
Never consider. For those of you with livestock, there is a third system that costs almost nothing to build.
And of course, they live a more testing life, a more physicality to it, you know. So give and take. Get rid of that comfort and convenience that this government management system has created, because it's not quite as beneficial as you might think. And oftentimes it's quite detrimental, particularly if you don't know what you're doing.
And nothing to operate. Biogas from manure. Penn State Extension documented this extensively. Pennsylvania alone produces 5.5 million tons of cow manure every year. A single dairy cow generates enough waste for 40 cubic feet of net biogas production per day. That gas is methane.
The government is banning these $29 adaptive glass.
Keep banning them. I don't care. Just as long as you don't ban me, because I need my people to hit that PayPal link and those like, share, and subscribe.
To the natural gas that arrives through the pipe from your utility company, a simple anaerobic digester built from a 55-gallon drum produces between 200 and 400 liters of cooking gas per month. That is enough to run a kitchen stove daily without paying a gas bill, no electricity required, no moving parts. You feed manure and water in, methane comes out. Some Amish communities in Pennsylvania have already adopted small-scale biodigesters that convert organic waste into biogas for heating and cooking. Pennsylvania has
Biogas digesters. It's the same thing as fermentation. Like when you're fermenting fruit for wines and stuff, you're letting it rot. That's literally what you're doing.
4 of the longest continuously operating farm-scale digesters in the entire country. They have been running for decades because the system works and it never stops working. So let me put this together for you. Sunflower oil for your diesel engine, your heater, your lamps, and your workshop tools. Canola oil for cold climate fuel that survives a northern winter without gelling. Flax oil for wood preservation, machinery, lubrication, and emergency backup fuel. Biogas from manure for your kitchen stove and household heating. Every one of these systems works with an existing home on existing land. Every one costs less than $100 to begin. Every one has been documented by a land-grant university. And every single one has been standard practice in Amish communities for longer than most of us have been alive. The complete system, fuel, energy, water, heat, is laid out step by step in the Amish Home System Guide. The link is in the description below. Now, I want to give you the part I promised at the very beginning. The detail that connects Atchison, Kansas to your fuel bill and to a boardroom in Houston, Texas, and that changes how you look at the entire system. After the Agrol plant was shut down in 1939 and reopened and shut down again in 1945, the federal government tracked energy subsidies for the next 6 decades. The General Accounting Office compiled the numbers between 1968 and the year 2000. The United States government gave $150 billion in tax credits and subsidies to the petroleum industry. In that exact same period, the entire farm, fuel, and ethanol industry received $11 billion. 150 billion versus 11 billion. That is not a free market deciding which fuel is cheaper. That is a $139 billion thumb on the scale, paid with your tax money, designed to make petroleum look like the only affordable option while every alternative starved. When someone tells you that pressing your own fuel is not economical, understand what that sentence actually means.
The same thing Walmart does with the little guys. And they starve them out through prices. They regulate prices and have backdoor contract with various different vendors, Pepsi, Coke, all that, to manipulate the pricing.
It means the math was rigged before you sat down to calculate it. Petroleum looks cheap because your own money was used to make it look cheap, and they knew what they were protecting far beyond the price at the pump. In July of 1977, a senior Exxon scientist named James Black stood before the company's management committee in their corporate headquarters and delivered a presentation that should have changed the world. He told them, using their own data, that carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels was warming the planet. He warned that doubling atmospheric carbon dioxide would raise global temperatures by 2 to 3 degrees. He told those executives that humanity had a window of 5 to 10 years before hard decisions about changing energy strategy would become critical. A year later, he repeated the warning with updated models. Exxon's internal scientists confirmed his projections by 1982 with their own climate models that turned out to be remarkably accurate decades later. Exxon did not develop alternatives. Exxon spent the next 30 years funding organizations that publicly denied the science their own researchers had confirmed. Inside Climate News and Scientific American both documented this from hundreds of pages of internal Exxon memos. The company that knew the truth in 1977 chose to protect quarterly earnings instead. The same pattern repeated like clockwork every time energy independence got close. Standard Oil killed Agrol in the 30s. The government revived ethanol plants when they needed them for war and abandoned them the moment the emergency passed. Then,
That's what you were saying earlier. Let's see here. Where was it? When they needed it for war, it was fine. Otherwise, not so much. Correct. And it's just all a manipulation to get the people to believe in one thing rather than doing their research so they know. That's mainly why things are hidden, because they're not really so hidden. It's just people don't do their research.
in the 1970s, the oil crisis hit. Gas lines wrapped around city blocks. Prices tripled. Americans were furious. And suddenly, more than 100 new ethanol plants sprang up across the country. Farm fuel was back. It was working. Communities were producing their own energy again. But when petroleum prices dropped artificially in the late 80s and 90s, driven by deliberate overproduction and political maneuvering, most of those plants went bankrupt. The cycle repeated a third time. Build it, Prove it works. Watch it get buried when the price of oil comes back down. And Exxon's own scientists told the truth in 1977, and the company buried it for 3 decades. Every time farm fuel works, it gets killed, not because it fails, because it succeeds. And because a farmer pressing...
Because it succeeds. And that's why they shut this down. You see, again, it's not a success for commerce in our aspect of what we're looking here. We're not looking to do this for commercial purposes. It is to save money, but it's more for self-sufficient purposes and not buying and selling. It's to produce enough to prevent us from having to put up with so much added expenses.
Sunflower oil.
So again, to avoid those added expenses, I would really appreciate it, folks, you'd hit that PayPal link and share some love. Always appreciated. And of course, the like, share, and subscribe. Get this out there. And of course, invite your friends and family to check out the channel and see what they think. Viewer interactive platform. I need everybody's opinion.
Oil in his shed does not need a tanker, a pipeline, a refinery, or a quarterly earnings report from anyone. There is a book that documents this entire cycle in meticulous detail. It is called The Forbidden Fuel, A History of Power, Alcohol. It is an academic history, not a pamphlet. It traces every step of the systematic suppression of farm-based fuel from the early 1900s through the modern era. It names the companies, it names the lobby groups, it cites the budget lines. If you want to understand why you have paid for fuel your entire life when the engine in your truck was designed to run on seed oil, that book is the place to start. And consider this. The diesel engine was not named after a fuel. It was named after a man, Rudolf Diesel. He built that engine to run on vegetable oil. That was the original design. That was the intended fuel. But
like I said, that's what they're using in a lot of your restaurants for your fryer oils is vegetable oil. It's straight up what that engine was invented for. It is straight up meant for that use specifically.
over the last century, the word diesel became synonymous with a petroleum product. They took the inventor's name and attached it to the very substance he was trying to replace. So every time you pull up to a pump and see the word diesel, you are reading the name of a man whose life's work was making sure you would never need that pump in the first place. The fuel bill was never mandatory. It was designed, it was subsidized with $150 billion of your money over 6 decades.
See how they flip the script and manipulate people's minds? See, when you look up that diesel guy and you find out he's the one that created the vegetable oil for those engines, and then think about today's diesel. That's not diesel according to what he created. That's petroleum.
And the system that replaces it has been growing in plain sight the entire time. In Amish fields, in Vermont barns, in university research stations that published their findings and watched the world ignore them. They did not bury this because it failed. They buried it because it worked. If that stops you cold, hit the like button right now, because I need to know how many of you made it to this point. Drop your state in the comments below. Because in the next video, I am mapping out exact yield numbers by state: sunflower, canola, and flax.
So yeah, go check that out and think about it, folks. We're trying to progress, and at the same time, it's my firm belief that if we're going to progress, then we need to bring back the strength of the local communities. The best way to do that is either single-handedly, like we saw with yesterday's video, the offended off-grid. It's something that we need to take upon as a responsibility individually, which is the most local power we have. And then, of course, your family structures, and then you build into your neighboring community type structures where you go beyond the family, you have multiple families. And this is the strongest, again, the strongest market is your own abilities to be self-sustaining and not dependent upon the grid markets. So think about this stuff. And remember, folks, I love you all, but I don't give a rat's ass whether you love me back. That's to say, I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you don't respect me. That part's on you.